Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the most hated tier list on the planet. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late this time, but we are gonna discuss the power level of all the heroes in the recent December update last week. The first thing, not a lot of changes on Abrams. They did his bullet damage down just a little bit and increased his spirit scaling on the Siphon Spirit just a little bit. Doesn't really change much. Still a very, very strong hero. Still A tier in my opinion. Has been A or S for the longest time. Still has a great shotgun for the laning stage. Still can last hit while reloading. Has an ult that can steal mid boss. Same as always. It seems like they think he's in a good spot because he hasn't received any large changes except his survivability took a pretty big hit when there was that big rebalance of all the anti-heal and healing. His resilience got taken down quite a lot, so it's definitely less tanky than before, but he still has tons of stuns, disables, and mid-boss steal, and is overall just a really good hero to have on your team. All right, Bebop got nerfed. The biggest nerf is that they halved the time where enemies are locked out of air control for the uppercut. So when you play Gun Bop, for instance, which has been the strongest Bebop build for a long time, you essentially rely on being able to track them throughout the air because they can't use any movement stuff for over a second. Now that's reduced to half a second. It means that it's much more required to buy Slowing Hex, for instance, so that you pop that as soon as you uppercut them, or they're more likely to escape. I do agree that Gun Bop was by far the strongest Bebop build, but I feel like instead of nerfing Gun Bop, they should have buffed the other Bebop builds. But nonetheless, he is D tier. He's not very great. There are some Bebop one tricks and stuff that are good at playing him and stuff, but the bomb build is useless. The ult build is useless. You're kind of forced to play gun build and just use your ultimate for farming jungles, which I don't really like either, because I feel like there should be a playstyle where the ultimate is useful and cool, but nonetheless, that's the current status. Then we have Dynamo. Dynamo received some nerfs on the ult cooldown, to no surprise there. It's the strongest ult in the game, and it's the ult with the longest cooldown in the game as well. They also recently nerfed the refresher's cast time from 0.3 to 0.6 seconds. This isn't really a huge deal other than all the times you try to do a double ult. So sometimes if you catch 4 or 5 players, you would ult with Dynamo, pop refresher, and ult instantly again. And they've kind of nerfed that a little bit now, so you actually have time to use warp stones or dashes out of the ult before he can cast a second one. I don't think that's really a huge deal because in a lot of cases you pop refresher before re-engaging anyway, because it also refreshes your heal and your quantum entanglement. So I don't consider that a big nerf overall. I think the cooldown nerf is a much bigger deal. He also now got a melee damage on the kinetic pulse tier 2. But to be honest, I've played some Dynamo after the patch. It doesn't change anything. He's still S tier. You just got to be more wary of your cooldowns, which makes perfect sense when the ult is so strong. But yeah, Dynamo still has the biggest playmaking potential in the game. Still has a good laning stage. You can save your teammates. You can heal. All of his abilities feel really impactful and work really well both in team play. His only downside is obviously he shouldn't be in a solo lane, but that's kind of just not what he's meant to do anyway. So yeah. All right, Great Talon got an interesting change this time. He now has curse on his trap instead of an immobilize. So whenever someone runs at it, they get cursed for 2.25 seconds once it's upgraded, which is pretty interesting because it means that if someone's trying to steal your mid boss, you can place a trap at the top and then Lash can't, for instance, go and ult and stuff. And you got to be more careful as a Dynamo and stuff too. So definitely an interesting change because having curse on a basic ability is quite strong. And you can also use charge shot to activate the trap as long as it's landed on the ground. But I just think Great Talon is weak anyway. We've had a pretty tank heavy meta for the longest time whatsoever, where sustain and frontlining is very important. Great Talon gets hard countered by things like knockdown or getting ran over by heroes like Shiv, Abrams. And once he gets ran over, there is really not much he can do. And I think that's just another hero that is fun to play, but isn't very strong. So I'm going to put him in D tier with Bebop. Then we have Haze. Haze got some reductions on the smoke bomb sprint. The smoke bomb sprint, by the way, is incredibly strong. Like, you take 1 point in sprint while you're in the laning stage, and you can just instantly go gank another lane super early, and you're so fast that you can do it pretty much between lanes. Like 5 meters per second is still so incredibly fast. They also reduced the charge time of a smoke bomb. They lowered the damage of fixation a little bit. And one interesting change that is definitely a nerf is that when you get slept by Haze now, you can still move for 2 meters per second. That's the same change as they did to Ethereal Shift as well. It still works great, and it's still slow enough so that if you're comboing with, let's say, a Bebop hook or something, it's not really that big of a deal, but the ability definitely is worse overall. They also increased the cooldown of Haze's ult, and they changed some slight spirit damage on the ult, so not really any huge changes here, but one thing I will say that this is still probably the strongest Haze has ever been. She does incredible damage. She has a long cooldown on the ult, and that one of the problems with Haze before, I feel like, was that the early game, she was pretty weak until you got some of those bigger items. But now that the ult is spirit damage, and now that you have that sprint speed on stealth, you also get pretty strong in the early game. I will say, though, I do feel like you can still buy, because like most people still play gun Haze, so you can still counter the ult with metal skin. Even though it also does spirit damage, it mainly does gun damage. You will only be taking fixation damage with metal skin. So you can still buy that and counter a lot of the damage, just not all of it. But yeah, Haze is in a pretty dang good spot, good hero. Also, the only hero that consistently has like 95 to 100% pick rate in any rank. So there's pretty much just a Haze in every game. That also explains a little bit about not only how strong the hero is, but also how popular she is. So where do we put Haze? I think she's at the very top of A tier. The reason why I don't put her in S is I still think that unless you are like very far ahead with Haze, it's still really scary to play that hero. You're still very squishy, and you can't really afford to buy too much survivability either, because then you're not going to get a chunk of damage on your ult. Well, they changed the ult to do spirit damage. They also removed the multi-target hits with the ult. So Haze's ult is much stronger now if you buy slowing hex and you attack one target, but in a big group, it does less damage than before. And ricochet doesn't work on the spirit damage. It's like less wombo combo ult mode compared to before, but more like buying Fleetfoot. A lot of people rush Lucky Shot, and they kind of just run their targets down and kill them. All right, next up we have Infernus. Infernus might have received the biggest buff this patch, in my opinion. The Flame Dash now has charges when it's maxed out, which means that when you buy Rapid Recharge, you get 3 charges of Flame Dash, and they have a 3-second cooldown between each cast. And you have time to do 4 of them in a row. Yes, you heard me. 4 of them in a row. They also increased the spirit scaling of Afterburn from 0.5 to 0.6. So Infernus is incredibly strong right now. The strongest he's ever been by far. And you not only do you need to buy anti-heals against him, but you also need to buy slowing hex or knockdowns to stop him from just sprinting away. So in my opinion, Infernus is probably the strongest hyper carry in this patch. And one thing I find interesting is that when you look at the win rates, I'm fairly certain that Infernus isn't that high. If you go to Eternus, he's at the very bottom with Haze. If you go all ranks, he's B tier. If you go Ascendant, he's consistently much further down. And Haze is also very far down. Haze obviously has like a very high pick rate, so that's going to lower the win rate in general. But it is weird to me that Infernus is that far down. But I'm going to put him at the very top of A tier still. I think both Infernus and Haze are in a really good spot now. Pretty annoying to play against. But yeah. The win rate stats are a little bit tricky to me. I don't think you should like fully just look at the win rate stats, because the issue with that is that now they've changed it so when you get more frontliners on it should be more balanced how many frontliners that are on each team. But there were situations where, because so many people pick carries, you were more likely to have Infernus, Haze, and Seven on the same team, which almost is an auto loss unless you manage to make the game 50 minutes long because everybody's just fighting over farm. It is smart to check these stats, but I think it's more important to check how much the win rates on each hero changes from each patch and not just what win rates they are at, because that tells you something about whether or not their power level is going up or down, because there are so many other factors involved as well. And the same goes for checking Eternus stats, because Eternus has such a small player pool that one person being a one trick on one hero could completely change the average win rates of a hero. So it's pretty hard without having a bigger data set to get accurate stats on it. All right, then we have Ivy. Ivy received a bunch of changes. Melee damage reduced, health reduced a little bit, airdrop damage reduced, fixed Phantom Strike not gone in Ivy. They also added a quality of life thing on the ult. Most of this is just quality of life. There's one thing that is interesting though, however, that I've noticed. So in this patch, they changed it so every urn carrier is locked to 13 meters per second. But for some reason, that is not working on Ivy's ult. I don't know if that has something to do with Ivy getting 1.5% speed from sprint, or if they just forgot to add a limits speed on the flight. But Ivy can still fly the urn over really quickly while everyone else is pretty much locked to 13 meters per second. Ivy is still one of the best heroes in the game and one of the heroes that can play any builds and be fine. You can play gun, you can play spirit, you can play support. You can just do whatever the heck you want on that hero and still be fine. So I think that's pretty interesting. So I'm gonna put Ivy in S tier. I still think that Ivy and Dynamo are just two heroes that can fit into any team comp and do their role well. And especially in ranked, if you play a lot of Ivy, what you can do is you can just change your build depending on what your teammates are, which is really cool. And there's not that many heroes that can do that. If you have a lot of carries on your team, then you'd play Spirit or Support. If you don't have any hyper carries on your team, you can go pure gun build. Like, you have so many options with Ivy. And she's just a damn strong hero. And especially right now, she is by far the strongest urn carrier because it just nerfed everyone else with that 13 meters per second thing, but Ivy. All right, speaking of good supports, we have Kelvin. Fixed some issue with being able to shoot half height cover, frost grenade, reduces stamina regen. It's mostly quality of life changes for Kelvin. One big quality of life change is the frozen shelter now created on key up. This means that you can hold down your ult button and you can see the AoE that your ult is casted on. And this is very helpful because sometimes with Kelvin, it's very easy to accidentally cast an ult and trap someone or accidentally leave someone just outside it. So that's a pretty big quality of life change. And Kelvin's ult is still very, very strong for securing the mid boss, for securing urns, turning fights, and he's just a damn good support. Most Kelvin builds are now either support or hybrid support. He's really strong in the lane. He has fast rotations. He can also ice path. It's just a really strong hero and a very annoying hero to play against. I know I say that a lot, but Kelvin really is one of those heroes that is just so frustrating to play against. If you play Lash, for instance, and you ult, and then he's just gonna dome, and then it cancels the ult on everybody. There's just so many situations where Kelvin can completely turn a team fight to your favor. Then we have Lady Geist. She had some pretty big changes. Malice can secure her orbs is one thing, but now her ult silences everybody in an AoE, 15-meter AoE for 3 seconds, and then she has charges on her suck instead. The problem is that the suck no longer silences. So I believe that overall this is a nerf. I think in low elo, it might be a buff because now you can cast Life Drain on multiple targets and play more as a tank. But from having a basic ability that silences a target to only doing an AoE silence on an ult that has a pretty long cooldown, to me, is a nerf. So combined with the Mystic Reverb nerfs a while ago, as well as the Malice debuff a while ago, I don't think that Geist is that great right now. I think she's like somewhere at the bottom of B tier. Okay, then we have Lash. The biggest change on Lash was that his ult now has a longer cooldown, but it now stuns the impact area for 1 second when you've maxed it out. And the reason why this is important is because there are so many heroes that can dodge or ground slam after you've ulted. Pocket can suitcase, Viscus can cube it, Yamato can ult it, Wraith can TP out, Dynamo can TP everybody out. It just made ult builds really, really unfun to play because it's one of those things where if you manage to get a good ult off with Lash and you grab 3 to 4 people, then that should also like feel rewarding instead of just everybody being able to TP out of it. So I personally think that this is a buff, but it's a buff to the Lash ult builds because now the ult is like much more impactful. If you get a good ult now, you do get the kills, pretty much guaranteed. And you almost always get to land a ground slam and a cold front before the stun runs out. If you're really high up, you might have to slam them into a wall so that their fall is slower, but that doesn't change much. So yeah, Lash is in a pretty good spot. I still think he's in a B tier. It's still one of those heroes that requires a lot of practice, which is why I think that it's a hero that win rate stats don't really represent very well, just because there is just a lot of bad Lash players because it's a very high skill cap hero. All right, then we have McGinnis. McGinnis got a big nerf to her turrets because, well, in the previous patch, turret McGinnis was one of the most broken builds in the game. Now they have a minimum lifetime of 4 seconds, but before it took 3 seconds to kill them regardless, which was absolutely atrocious. And they also nerfed the fire rate. The turret build got shafted, and that was kind of expected because it was just too strong in the last patch. She's still a really good hero, and you can still play both gun and turret. But this nerf puts her a little bit more chill. I still believe she is in A tier. That wall can like completely change team fights. Her ult makes farming tier 3s very efficient. She's a laning demon. She can run down walkers. But yeah, Mirage now has a drain over 4 seconds instead of just a front-loaded fire scarab. But the interesting thing is that now it doesn't restrict you from hitting the same target. So basically what you can do now is that if you're 1v1ing someone, you can keep refreshing your fire scarab on them and it keeps leeching health from them. Because now the launch window is increased from 5 to 8 seconds, so it makes him a much better duelist. The cooldown on the ult is now longer, but instead they give the ally traveler benefits now, so it gives the buff to allies. I think the biggest issue with Mirage right now is that his ult is bugged a lot of the time, so you TP, but you don't get to see the surroundings because they added that last patch where when you use traveler, you're also able to see everything around you. So yeah, that's a pretty annoying bug, but I still think he's really good, and is one of the heroes that now that I've practiced him a little bit more, I realize how good he is, and I can see why a lot of teams use him. And having a global ult also, he's the only hero that can force a 6v5 team fight by pushing on the opposite side of the map, then force a rotation, and then TP into the team fight, and now you have a 6v5. So yeah, I'm putting him in A tier between Kelvin and McGinnis. All right, then we have Mo and Krill. Mo and Krill no longer is affected by shoulder charge, so that makes his matchup against Abrams better. Score now heals instantly instead of over time. And last patch, they added a bullet resistance on headshots on the big head, not the small head, as well as a bigger heal on the ult. I still think that Mo and Krill is one of the strongest heroes in the game. He has like tons of playmaking potential and shutdown potential, and he scales. So to me, that's just an instant S tier. Very, very strong. And speaking of very, very strong heroes, we have Paradox. Not any like huge changes this time. The only thing that's interesting this time is because they buffed the sharpshooter item, that item is even better for Paradox now, so the carbine builds are even stronger. But I think that in this current meta, Paradox is actually the strongest hero in the game. She has insane playmaking potential, the swap is very strong, a good laning stage, decent farming speed, the carbine into swap into silence is like uncounterable, and if you play like an in-game leader, like you're actively telling your teammates what to do and kind of run the show and stuff, this hero is just so good. It's also the hero that I have the biggest win rate on by far. My win rate on Paradox is between 65 to 70%. And it's just because when I play other heroes, I feel like I'm in the passenger seat a lot. I'm just farming and doing my thing. But when I play Paradox, I feel like I'm in the driver's seat. I'm like actively looking for fights, actively telling my teammates, yo, like get ready, I'm looking for a swap. And then I use the Veil Walker and I go for the swap. And if they get swapped, they almost die as long as you have any sort of follow-up from the team. And it's interesting because she doesn't have a very high win rate overall, and that's, to me, that seems like the exact same reason as with Lash, whereas you need to be pretty good at the game to be good at the hero, and you also need a team to follow up with what you're doing. You're not really a hero that duels other heroes as well as other heroes do, but you're so damn good at setting up team fights. Okay. And then we have Pocket. Pocket finally got nerfed after a lot of complaints and a lot of complaints, especially about the ult. There's finally some nerfs. Health growth reduced, escape duration reduced on the satchel, but then you get it back on a tier 3. The biggest change is Affliction. Affliction now front loads some of the damage into a burst damage, which is going to be 18% of the current health, but the DPS is reduced a lot and the spirit scaling is reduced a lot. So what this means is that when you get hit by Pocket, you don't have to run to the base every single time now, because that's really how it felt to play against Pocket before. You would just Pocket ulted, all right, back to base you go. Have fun. So, in my opinion, this bumps Pocket from S tier and down to A. I still think it's a really good hero, but that Affliction is what made that hero completely busted. And I think this ult definitely is a lot weaker. It's still pretty strong against tanks, especially endgame, because it's a HP scaling ult. But yeah, not as strong as before. The tier 3 talent is crazy though. Increased range, increased initial damage, and increased DPS. But yeah, then we have 7. 7 got a interesting thing here. Stormcloud now grants you a secondary ability, Lightning Strike. It's a one-time use AoE ability. You can target anywhere in your ultimate range after 2 seconds delay. It releases a vertical lightning strike, knocking enemies away. And you can also now move around in 2.5 meters per second with 7's ult. But you know what? It doesn't matter. 7's ult is still ass. You are still floating up in the air. You are still super exposed unless you have tons of farm and unstoppable, or like nobody is smart enough to buy knockdown, or nobody has a hook or anything. It is just so damn weak. So 7 C tier, in my opinion, still has more impact than Grey and Talon and Bebop usually, but I just think that ult needs to be reworked. I know it's decent in low elo sometimes and stuff at the end where you can like defend your patron and stuff, but there are so many counters and you're so exposed and you're just like hanging out up in the air and getting owned. Then we have a Shiv. Shiv has been nerfed a lot and he's pretty much been in the same spot for quite a while now. Yeah, I think he's weaker than Abrams. I think he's weaker than Kelvin, Mirage, and McGinnis too. He does rely on having a lot of farm. Don't get me wrong, he still can sometimes pop off like crazy, but I feel like it happens much less often than before. And especially there's much more melee resistant items in the game now than before as well. So he's easier to deal with than before. Also with the nerf to Leech and all the healing items in general, he's not as unkillable as he used to be. So I'm going to put him in top of a B tier. And then we have Vindicta. Vindicta's health got reduced. Crow familiar projectile increased. Mistake cooldown reduced. Oh, that's pretty much the same. The biggest change is the assassinate time between charges increased and is slightly lowering assassinate damage. Vindicta is a weird one to me because in some games, Vindicta just completely dominates. But I do feel like in a lot of cases, it's definitely a skill issue to deal with. The reason why I'm saying that is because what a lot of Vindicta players do is they save all their skill points for the ult and they max it as soon as possible because you get an extra 600 souls for each ult. Now, unless you are in a huge souls advantage, I don't really see Vindictas having a huge impact on the game because of how easy it is to buy knockdown. And as soon as you buy knockdown, she is forced to buy ethereal shift, and then she already has to play much more defensive than before. So I think that Vindicta is like a really good noob killer, and she's still one of the more like feast or famine heroes because if she gets a few ult kills, she can get an insane soul count, and she doesn't have to steal jungle farm from your teammates because she's farming heroes instead. But yeah, I don't think she's that great. Put her in C tier. Viscus got a pretty big change to the punch builds. Tier 3 punch now becomes heavy melee. And oh boy, is that annoying to deal with. I don't know if it's just that I'm a bad player, but I constantly struggle against Viscus. He's hard to kill. Ever since Arcane Surge was added, he's really good. The ult is really good. He can become a huge ball. The punch build is really good. Weapon builds are really good. Viscus has a lot of like... To me, it's kind of like Ivy, where you can play so many different builds and still have impact. And especially with the punch now also becoming heavy melee, you can do so much damage. And I feel like it's one of the heroes that can genuinely solo carry games. It's happened to me a few times. I played against a Viscus who gets ahead, and he genuinely does not die. And I can't say that for that many heroes. Like, Viscus can straight up like 1v6 if you get ahead and if you're a good player. So to me, I think this is the first time. You know what? I'm going to give some minus points just because it's a very hard hero to play, and this tier list isn't supposed to just be for high elo. If this was a purely high elo play tier list, I would put him in S tier. But I think because you need to be really good and he's hard to play, I'm going to put him in high A. Yeah. And I feel like Viscus and Pocket are like equally annoying to deal with. Okay. Next up, we have Warden. Warden is one of the heroes I've gotten criticized the most for putting in low tiers in previous tier lists. And I have been trying to play more Warden to figure things out. And I have been playing against more good Wardens as well. So I do see more now why people think he's so good. They did nerf his spirit power scaling, and the gun build is definitely the strongest Warden build by far. And even in Infernus and Ascendant, he's got ridiculously high win rates as well as in low. And the thing is, he's not that complicated to play either. So I think that one thing that you can say about Warden is that because he's not that hard to play, his win rate overall is going to go up, because heroes with a high skill cap will never have a very high win rate. But I do acknowledge that I've definitely underestimated how strong Warden is. And after having played against several good Wardens, as well as tried to play some more Warden myself to see what the fuss is about, I'm actually putting him in S tier. I know it's crazy. I probably... And feel free to flame me for it, but this is why we do this. We do this to learn. And I've definitely been sleeping on Warden way too much, and I get it now. I get it. He is very strong. Another thing is also that they also now gave his ult another 2.5 second duration. So, and the fact that it only goes on cooldown for 20 seconds, now we're interrupted instead of full, means that you essentially will get your ults off pretty often. So yeah, I get it. I get it now. I was wrong. Then we have Wraith. Bullet damage growth increased. Full auto spirit damage per bullet. Has default spirit scaling. The biggest change to me was that instead of the ult lifting people for a while, so you could like burst them down like with the shadow weave spirit builds and everything, now it lifts them for a short time and slams them to the ground and leaves the target with a silence and disarm. But I personally think that this is much worse. I personally think that the old ult was better, and now you can use debuff removers to get rid of the silence and disarm if you want. You can use items as well. I think it made her much worse, actually. I still think Wraith is really good at solo pushing and everything, but I think she definitely took a big hit and now is B tier. Probably right after Lash there. All right, and then finally we have Yamato. Yamato's Flying Strike now lets you grapple to allies. Shadow Transformation level 3 now increases resist by 15%. She's in a pretty good spot, I think, because last patch they changed it so she gets a little bit of heal when she ults and then a little bit of heal when she gets the kill. So now I think she's much more balanced than before. And I still hate playing against her, I can't lie. But yeah, I think she's in a good spot. I think she's at the top of B tier. She's still annoying to deal with. She can still steal the mid-boss crystal because her ult makes her immune, but she does die in her ult now compared to before. But yeah, nonetheless, I think she's in a spot where good players can make her shine and bad players will just die. And that's kind of where that hero should be. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention about the new Wraith ult that is nice is that it also works as a knockdown now. So that's pretty good. So if you're dealing with a lot of airborne targets, it does knock them to the ground, which is pretty good. And the ult has a bigger projectile speed. So in team fights, that's great. But one thing that is important to remember is that she used to be able to just fully crowd control 3 targets when ulting, while now it can bounce to 1 nearby target and you can warp stone out after a little while. So the old ult was definitely stronger in my opinion, but it's just a different way of playing. So it reduces the amount of like very hard CC. It reduces the amount of like one-shot capabilities, but it has a lot of good teamfight synergies. Anyway, that was my tier list for this time. As usual, don't forget to leave a comment down below on how much I screwed up this time, because I know how much you guys love to comment on all the stuff I put in the wrong tiers. So I can't wait to see those comments. I do usually read them, even though I don't always respond to them. And the reason why I do make these tier lists is because it is the favorite videos recently on my channel. Every time I make tier lists, it seems like it adds more comments, more views, and more people are excited to see them, to get a update on what the recent patch gave and what it didn't give and so on. So I'm gonna keep making them, and feel free to keep hating, because we love haters. We do. And the good thing about YouTube is that YouTube does not know the difference between a negative or a positive comment. It's all just great vibes. So without further ado, I am AverageJonas. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.